Episode 11, Everybody Knows Your Name. Part 1. The Bell and Anchor had been standing on that corner longer than anyone inside it could remember. Longer, probably, than they cared to. It squatted at the junction of two narrow streets in North London, brick-darkened by decades of rain and coal smoke, its windows glowing amber against the early evening drizzle. The pub didn't advertise itself. It didn't need to. The people who drank there came because they always had. Fathers brought sons. Sons grew into men who sat in the same seats and drank the same pints, nodding to the same faces until one day they were the oldest ones left. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of ale, damp wool, and old wood. The floorboards dipped slightly toward the bar, worn by generations of boots. Brass fixtures gleamed dully under yellow light. A dartboard hung crookedly on the far wall, its numbers faded, its cork scarred beyond recognition. At 6:30, the regulars were already in place. Arthur Bell, no relation to the pub's name, though everyone assumed otherwise, sat on his usual stool at the end of the bar, nursing a bitter. He had the posture of a man who'd once been broad and solid and now seemed to be collapsing inward, as if time were folding him up. Beside him, two builders in Mud Street boots argued about football in low voices. In the corner, Mrs. Halpern sipped gin and tonic and pretended not to listen to anyone. And behind the bar stood Malcolm Reed, polishing the same glass he'd been polishing for the better part of 20 years. Malcolm knew everyone's name. He knew what they drank, how fast they drank it, and when to stop serving them before trouble started. He knew which arguments would stay friendly and which would turn sour. He knew who paid on time and who needed reminding, and who had stopped bringing their wives in because their wives had stopped speaking to them. It was a skill, knowing people like that. A kind of quiet vigilance. What Malcolm didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that someone else in the room had been watching just as closely. The man sat alone at a small table near the back, half hidden by a support pillar. He wore a dark coat despite the warmth of the pub and kept his hat low on his head. In front of him sat an untouched pint, its foam collapsing slowly. He wasn't reading. He wasn't talking. He wasn't even pretending to look around. But he was listening. He noted who arrived and who didn't. Who greeted whom. Who avoided eye contact. He noted the way Malcolm's hand paused, just slightly, when pouring Arthur Bell's drink. The way Mrs. Halpern's smile tightened when the builders laughed too loudly. The way the pub breathed, expanded, contracted, around its familiar rhythms. Some places told their secrets freely, if you stayed long enough. The bell above the door rang, and for just a moment the noise level dipped. Detective Inspector Alistair Finch stepped inside. He paused, as he always did, letting the room adjust to him rather than the other way around. Finch wore his trench coat despite the warmth and held his hat in his hand, rain beading along the brim. His face was lined, tired, but alert, eyes already taking in exits, reflections, the spaces between people. He didn't look like trouble. That, Finch knew, was what made people talk. Malcolm spotted him immediately and straightened, setting the glass aside. He didn't smile, not exactly, but recognition flickered across his face. "Evening," Malcolm said. "Evening," Finch replied, voice mild. "Still serving the same sins, I see." Malcolm snorted. "Some of them won't give them up." Finch moved to the bar, resting his hat on the counter. He didn't order right away. Instead, he looked around the pub, letting the silence stretch just enough to feel deliberate. "Quiet night," Finch said. Malcolm shrugged. "For now. Mind if I ask you a few questions first?" The shrug tightened. "Depends on the questions." Finch met his gaze. "Anyone been asking after old business?" Malcolm hesitated, just a fraction too long. Arthur Bell watched from the corner of his eye. The man at the back table leaned forward slightly. "No," Malcolm said. "Can't say as they have." Finch nodded, as if satisfied. He reached into his pocket and set a folded photograph on the bar, turning it so Malcolm could see. Malcolm's hand stilled. The photograph showed a man in his late 50s, balding, spectacles crooked on his nose. He was smiling, caught mid-laugh, a pint raised in salute. "Do you recognize him?" Finch asked. Malcolm swallowed. That's Peter Crowley. Finch said gently. The pub seemed to lean closer. He was found this morning, Finch continued. Down by the canal. No obvious signs of violence. No witnesses. Malcolm's voice came out rough. Peter doesn't go near the canal. Finch nodded again. That's what concerned us. Arthur Bell set his pint down. Peter was here last night. Finch turned slightly. What time? Arthur frowned, searching his memory. Late. After 9. Maybe past. And did he leave alone? Arthur opened his mouth, then closed it again. I don't rightly remember, he said. I thought he did. Thought, Finch repeated. The man at the back table stood. He crossed the pub slowly, unhurried, careful not to draw attention. When he reached the bar, he placed a coin beside Finch's photograph. For the landlord, he said quietly. His accent was unremarkable. Easy to forget. Malcolm looked up. You didn't finish your pint. The man smiled. Didn't care for the taste. He turned to Finch, meeting his eyes for the first time. Everybody knows everybody in places like this, he said. Funny thing is, no one ever really sees. Finch studied him. Something about the man felt deliberate. Too composed. Too aware of the room. Did you know Peter Crowley? Finch asked. The man tilted his head. Knew of him. And were you here last night? A pause. Barely perceptible. Yes. Finch filed that away. Name? Finch asked. The man smiled again, polite as anything. You can call me a regular. He turned and walked out, the bell ringing softly behind him. Finch watched the door long after it closed. Then he picked up the photograph again. Looks like, Finch said quietly, someone walked Peter Crowley home. And somewhere in the pub, someone who knew exactly what that meant took careful note of the words. Episode 11, Everybody Knows Your Name. Part 2. The bell and anchor didn't empty all at once. It never did. Men finished their pints in stages, lingering out of habit rather than thirst. Chairs scraped back slowly. Coats were pulled on with ritual care. Good nights were exchanged that sounded more like acknowledgements than farewells. Even as the night crept in through the windows, the pub resisted letting go of its people. Detective Inspector Alistair Finch stayed at the bar long after the door closed behind the man who called himself a regular. Malcolm Reed poured Finch a whiskey without being asked. He slid it across the bar and kept his hand resting on the counter, as if anchoring himself. You didn't ask his name, Malcolm said. No, Finch replied. I noticed. Malcolm frowned. You going to? Finch took a measured sip. If I have to. I'd rather see where he turns up first. Malcolm exhaled. That sort of thing doesn't usually end well. Most things don't, Finch said mildly. Arthur Bell had not left. He sat hunched over his empty glass, eyes fixed on a dark knot in the wood of the bar. Mrs. Halpern lingered near the coat rack, pretending to search her handbag while listening shamelessly. You said Peter Crowley was here last night, Finch said, raising his voice just enough. I'd like to hear that again. Slowly. Arthur cleared his throat. He came in late. Later than usual. Looked rattled. In what way? Arthur shrugged. Hard to say. Like he'd been arguing with someone. Kept checking the door. Malcolm nodded. He asked if anyone had been in looking for him. Finch's gaze sharpened. And had anyone? No, Malcolm said. At least, no one said they were. But someone could have been asking quietly, Finch said. Arthur shifted. Peter didn't stay long. 1 pint. Drank it too fast. And then? Arthur hesitated. He didn't leave alone, Mrs. Halpern said suddenly. Both men turned toward her. She straightened her coat with dignity. You asked who sees things. I see things. Finch inclined his head. Go on. He left with that man, she said. The one in the dark coat. They didn't speak much. But they left together. Malcolm frowned. I didn't see that. You were pulling a pint, she said crisply. I wasn't. Finch let the silence settle. Did they seem friendly? Finch asked. No, Mrs. Halpern said. They seemed resigned. That word hung in the air longer than the rest. Finch finished his whiskey and set the glass down carefully. Thank you. As he reached for his hat, the bell rang again. This time, the room shifted. Cindy Lawless stepped inside. She brought the cold with her, rain slicking her leather jacket, auburn hair pulled back carelessly. She looked out of place in the pub and entirely at home all at once, streetwise eyes, sharp posture, the faintest suggestion of a smile that never quite arrived. Malcolm's eyebrows lifted. Well, that's new. Cindy spotted Finch immediately. Thought I might find you here. Finch sighed. I was hoping you wouldn't. She smirked. You always say that. Arthur Bell leaned closer to Malcolm. Who's she? Trouble, Malcolm murmured. Cindy shook the rain from her jacket and glanced around the pub. Smells like nostalgia and poor decisions. Finch picked up his hat. What are you doing here, Cindy? Working, she said. Same as you. That's debatable. She ignored him and turned to Malcolm. You Malcolm? Yes. You know Peter Crowley? Malcolm stiffened. Did? Cindy nodded. He owed money. Arthur sat up straighter. Peter didn't owe anyone. Cindy's eyes flicked to him. Everyone owes someone, love. Question is who keeps the ledger. Finch gave her a warning look. This isn't your case. She smiled sweetly. Funny thing is, the people I answer to don't care whose case it is. She reached into her jacket and produced a folded paper, sliding it across the bar. Malcolm read it once. Then again. His face drained of color. Finch leaned over. What is it? Threat, Malcolm said hoarsely. Left under the till this morning. Cindy watched Finch carefully. Same paper was left on Peter's narrowboat last week. Finch stiffened. You didn't mention a boat. Didn't think you knew, Cindy said. Didn't think you cared. Finch turned back to Malcolm. What does it say? Malcolm swallowed. It lists names. Mrs. Halpern sucked in a breath. Names of who? People who drink here, Malcolm said quietly. The pub seemed to contract around them. Finch took the paper. It was handwritten. Neat. Methodical. Each name had a date beside it. Peter Crowley's was circled. And the others? Finch asked. Cindy answered. Not circled. Yet. Arthur's hand shook as he reached for his coat. You saying this pub is next? Cindy shrugged. I'm saying someone's collecting debts they think are overdue. Finch folded the paper carefully. And you're involved how? Cindy met his gaze. Peter came to me scared. Said someone from his past had found him. Someone he thought was dead. Finch felt the familiar tightening behind his eyes. Why didn't you bring him to the police? He didn't trust them, she said. He trusted you. I trusted me. Finch looked around the pub, at the familiar faces, the quiet panic creeping in around the edges. This place remembers everything, Cindy continued. That makes it dangerous. The bell rang again as the door opened. Everyone turned. But it was only the wind. Still, Finch couldn't shake the feeling that someone else had already left their mark on the room. Someone who knew every name. And wasn't done saying them aloud. Part 3. The canal at night was a different country. By day, it played at being picturesque, narrowboats painted in cheerful colors, ducks weaving between moorings, tourists leaning over railings with cameras and questions. By night, it reverted to something older and less forgiving. The water turned black and patient. Sounds carried farther than they should. Footsteps echoed with too much clarity. Finch walked the towpath with his hands deep in the pockets of his trench coat, hat pulled low against the drizzle. Cindy Lawless kept pace beside him, her boots confident, her posture alert. She knew this terrain, not the geography, but the feeling of it. "You didn't tell them everything back there," Finch said. Cindy smiled thinly. "Neither did you." They stopped where the path narrowed, the canal widening into a slow bend. A narrowboat lay moored ahead, its cabin dark, ropes drawn tight as if the vessel had tried to pull away and failed. "That's Peter's," Cindy said. Finch studied the boat from a distance. "You've been here before?" "Once. He asked me to come." She hesitated. He was shaking. Crowley didn't strike me as the nervous sort. He wasn't, Cindy said. Which is why it mattered. They approached the boat carefully. Finch noted the details automatically, no sign of forced entry, lines neatly tied, a faint light glowing inside the cabin. The boat looked inhabited. Waiting. Finch stepped onto the narrow deck, testing his footing. "Police," he called softly, more out of habit than expectation. No answer. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp wood, old tea, and something metallic beneath it all. Finch's instincts tightened. The table was cluttered with papers, letters, receipts, handwritten notes. Cindy moved to the stove, scanning quickly. "He was packing," she said. "Or thinking about it." Finch picked up a notebook. The handwriting was the same as the list, neat, controlled, but the voice was different. Crowley's voice. Nervous. Apologetic. Dates. Names. Amounts. Finch's jaw set. He wasn't just drinking here. He was keeping accounts. Cindy leaned over his shoulder. "For whom?" Before Finch could answer, his eye snagged on something else. A photograph. It showed a younger Peter Crowley standing outside a pub, this pub, though the sign above the door bore an older name. Crowley had his arm around another man, taller, leaner, his face partially obscured by shadow. Finch felt a cold prickle along his spine. "Who's that?" Cindy asked. "I don't know," Finch said. "But he knows Peter." A knock sounded against the hull. Both of them froze. "Inspector Finch," a voice called quietly. "I was hoping you'd come." Finch stepped back onto the deck, hand resting near his coat pocket. Arthur Bell stood on the towpath, hat in hand, face pale. "You shouldn't be here," Finch said. Arthur swallowed. "I saw the lights. Thought I should tell you something before it's too late." Cindy folded her arms. "Before what's too late?" Arthur glanced at the water. "That list. It isn't about money." Finch's eyes sharpened. "Then what is it about?" Arthur took a breath. "Guilt." He told them then. About the night 20 years ago when the pub had been something else, louder, rougher, less forgiving. About a fight that spilled into the street. About a man who fell and didn't get up. "We didn't call the police," Arthur said, voice breaking. "We moved him. Thought he was drunk. Thought he'd sleep it off." Cindy's expression hardened. "Did he?" Arthur shook his head. "He drowned." The canal lapped softly against the boat, as if in quiet agreement. "And Peter?" Finch asked. "He helped," Arthur said. "So did Malcolm. So did others." Finch thought of the list. The dates. "He kept quiet all these years," Arthur continued. "Until someone came back." "Someone you thought was dead," Cindy said. Arthur nodded. "We saw him pulled from the water. Or thought we did." Finch's stomach tightened. "And now he's counting names." Arthur's shoulders sagged. "Everyone knows your name at the Bell and Anchor." Silence stretched. Finally, Finch said, "Go home, Arthur." Arthur hesitated. "Inspector, am I next?" Finch met his gaze. "That depends on who's really keeping score." Arthur left without another word. Back inside the boat, Cindy leaned against the counter. "This isn't just revenge," she said. "It's theater." "Yes," Finch agreed. "Public. Methodical. And personal," Cindy added, watching him carefully. Finch didn't respond. Later, as Finch walked back toward the streetlights, he felt it again, the sense of being observed. Not followed. Not hunted. Measured. Somewhere behind him, water shifted softly. And Finch wondered, not for the first time, whether the list had always been longer than anyone realized. Episode 11, Everybody Knows Your Name. Part 4. The Bell and Anchor opened early the next morning. It wasn't official. Malcolm hadn't put the sign out or pulled the curtains back all the way. But the door was unlocked, and the kettle was on, and the regulars came anyway, quietly, cautiously, like parishioners entering a church after a funeral. Finch stood across the street, watching. The pub looked unchanged in daylight, which was somehow worse. Same brickwork. Same hanging sign, creaking slightly in the breeze. Same sense of permanence. But Finch had learned long ago that places didn't stay the same just because they looked it. He crossed over as Cindy Lawless joined him, lighting a cigarette she didn't smoke so much as keep burning between her fingers. "You didn't sleep," she said. Finch didn't deny it. "Neither did you." She shrugged. "Old habits." Inside, the air smelled of stale beer and nervous sweat. Conversation stopped when Finch entered, then resumed at a lower pitch, glances darting, words chosen carefully. Malcolm stood behind the bar, sleeves rolled up, eyes rimmed red. He looked like a man who'd aged a year overnight. "Inspector," he said. "Didn't think you'd come back so soon." Finch set his hat on the bar. "Didn't think you'd open." Malcolm gave a thin smile. People needed somewhere to sit. Finch scanned the room. Arthur Bell was there, hunched over a mug of tea. Mrs. Halperin occupied her usual seat, handbag clutched like armor. Two men Finch hadn't seen before lingered near the back, pretending not to listen. "Anyone missing?" Finch asked. Malcolm hesitated. "Not yet." The word "yet" sat between them. Finch nodded toward the office door. "May I?" Malcolm stepped aside. The office was cramped, cluttered with invoices and old ledgers. Finch closed the door behind them. "You didn't tell me everything last night," Finch said. Malcolm's jaw tightened. "No." "Start now." Malcolm leaned against the desk. "The man who died, the one Arthur told you about. His name was Tom Reeves." Finch's chest tightened imperceptibly. "When was this?" Finch asked. 73, Malcolm said. "Winter." Finch's gaze flicked up sharply. "You're certain?" "Yes." The year echoed unpleasantly in Finch's mind. "What happened that night?" Finch asked. Malcolm swallowed. "There was a fight. Words got heated. Tom said things he shouldn't have." "To whom?" Malcolm hesitated too long. "Say it," Finch said quietly. "To you," Malcolm said. The room seemed to tilt. "I wasn't there," Finch said. "No," Malcolm agreed quickly. "But you'd been. Earlier. You'd stopped in after a long shift. Tom recognized you." Finch felt the past stir, smoke, noise, the weight of fatigue pressing down on him. "What did he say?" Finch asked. Malcolm looked away. "He said you knew what kind of men drank here. That you looked the other way." Finch closed his eyes briefly. "I left," Finch said. "I remember that." "Yes," Malcolm said. "You left?" "And after that, things went wrong." The kettle in the bar whistled faintly through the wall. "You didn't kill him," Malcolm said quickly. "None of us meant to." "Intent doesn't erase consequence," Finch replied. Malcolm nodded miserably. Peter wanted to go to the police. The others talked him out of it. "And Tom Reeves?" Finch asked. "We thought he was unconscious," Malcolm said. He fell into the canal while we were moving him. Finch's voice was steady. And you let everyone believe he'd stumbled in drunk. Yes. Finch exhaled slowly. Outside, a sudden commotion rose, voices raised, chairs scraping. Finch opened the office door. Arthur Bell stood near the bar, trembling. Mrs. Halperin clutched his arm. There's something on the door, she said. Outside. Finch stepped past them. Pinned neatly to the pub's front door was a piece of paper. Another list. This one shorter. Arthur Bell's name was crossed through in red ink. Below it, a single word. Forgiven. Arthur let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. I'm safe, then? That's what it means, isn't it? Finch studied the paper. Forgiveness was never that simple. Has anyone seen this man? Finch asked, holding up the photograph from Peter's boat. A murmur rippled through the room. One of the men near the back shifted uncomfortably. I might have. Finch turned. You might have. Couple nights ago. Outside. Watching the place. Cindy stepped closer. Watching or waiting? The man swallowed. Waiting. For whom? Finch asked. The man hesitated, then nodded toward Finch. Silence crashed down. Finch felt every eye on him. Why me? Finch asked calmly. The man shrugged. He asked about you. Said he was interested in how far loyalty went. Cindy's gaze snapped to Finch. You didn't tell me this part. Finch didn't look at her. I didn't know it. Outside, sirens wailed distantly, somewhere else, someone else's trouble. Finch folded the list carefully and slipped it into his coat. This ends now, Malcolm said hoarsely. You can't let him keep doing this. Finch looked around the room, at the fear, the shared history, the rot beneath familiarity. He won't stop, Finch said. Not on his own terms. Cindy stepped closer. Then what? Finch met her eyes. Then we force him into the light. That night, as Finch walked home, he felt it again, the unmistakable certainty of being watched. Only this time, he understood why. The past hadn't come back for the pub. It had come back for him. And whoever was holding the list knew exactly where Finch stood in the ledger. The following evening, the rain returned, slanting against the pub windows in thin, cold lines. Finch arrived early, ahead of the regulars, and found Malcolm sweeping the floor, the broom moving more like a ritual than a chore. The pub smelled of wet wood and bitter ale, the faint tang of smoke clinging to the beams. Quiet, Malcolm said, his voice low, almost trembling. Too quiet. Finch nodded. He left his coat and hat at the door and moved slowly to the bar, scanning the room. Every shadow, every reflection in the darkened windows seemed sharper tonight. He sensed that the pub itself was holding its breath. Cindy Lawless was already there, perched on a stool, coat damp and collar up against the drizzle. She gave him a sharp nod. We're not alone, she said. Someone's been here. Finch's eyes narrowed. Anyone else inside? She shook her head. No. Whoever it was left just before I arrived. He leaned on the bar, folding his hands over the polished wood. Malcolm, this isn't just about Peter Crowley or that list. Something else is moving in. Malcolm hesitated. You think it's connected to the old incident? Everything in this pub, Finch said quietly, is connected. The people, the debts, the secrets. And someone wants to remind us all. Arthur Bell appeared from the corner, coat pulled tightly around him, eyes wide. I've been thinking, he said, voice low. About the list. About Peter. About what happened back then. Finch turned toward him. Go on. Arthur ran a trembling hand through his hair. It's not just Peter Crowley. It's all of us who were there that night. The man in the photograph, the one with Peter, is making sure we all remember. Cindy's eye sharpened. Making sure how? Arthur swallowed hard. By putting us on notice. One at a time. The crossed-out names mean nothing. It's a warning. And I think he wants me to pass it on to the others. Finch's jaw tightened. Who exactly are we talking about? How many names are on that list? Malcolm shook his head. Too many. Too many, and the dates, they're staggered. Planned. Calculated. The pub door opened suddenly, letting in a gust of wet air and a shadow that moved too quickly to be anyone familiar. The bell above the door jingled once, the sound harsh against the quiet. A young man entered, soaked, hat in hand, eyes darting to Finch and Cindy. "Detective Inspector," he asked. I think someone's after my father." Finch motioned for him to sit. "Tell me everything from the beginning." The boy hesitated. We live above the corner shop near the canal. Dad's been getting strange notes, messages left under the door. He's been scared. Said someone's watching him, counting down days or something." Cindy exchanged a glance with Finch. "Does he know about Peter Crowley?" The boy shook his head. "No. But the handwriting, it looked like the same as the one on the pub list." Finch leaned back against the bar, mind racing. The list, the narrowboat, the old deaths, everything was converging. "Cindy, I want you to check the canal again. Look for footprints, anything unusual. I'll speak with Malcolm and the boy's father." As they split tasks, the pub began to fill with the regulars, each of them drawn by habit and fear. Every step, every cough, seemed heavier than it should have been. I shifted nervously toward Finch, toward each other, toward shadows that didn't exist, or perhaps did. Arthur Bell approached Finch quietly, his hands clasped in front of him. "Inspector, I've been thinking. Maybe the crossed-out names aren't just warnings. Maybe it's about guilt. Each person he marks, he's making them pay for something." Finch studied him. "And you?" Arthur's shoulders slumped. I don't know. I've carried it all these years. But maybe the guilt is only part of it. Maybe he's testing us. Seeing who cracks." Finch didn't answer immediately. He sensed the truth in Arthur's words, but also the misdirection. A man who orchestrates terror like this doesn't need guilt alone, he thrives on control. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the front. A chair toppled, a mug shattered against the floor. Malcolm shouted, "Stay calm." Finch and Cindy moved immediately, the boy clinging to Arthur's side, wide-eyed. A note fluttered down from the ceiling, landing near the bar. Finch picked it up carefully. It was another list. This time, the ink was darker, heavier. The handwriting unmistakable. And at the top, a single phrase. "Someone has to fall first." Cindy's eyes were sharp. "He's escalating." Finch's mind worked rapidly. Each previous warning, each circled name, had been methodical. Calculated. Now the tone had shifted. Threats were no longer subtle, they were promises. Arthur trembled. I don't understand. Why here? Why now?" Finch's gaze swept the room. Every face held a history, a past misdeed, a secret kept just beneath the surface. "Because the pub remembers," Finch said. "And the people in it, those who know, are all fair game." Malcolm swallowed. "You mean, he's going to strike someone here?" Finch didn't answer. He already knew. The man in the photograph, the shadow from the past, had planned this for decades. Patience had been his weapon. Fear was his method. And now, the time for subtlety was over. The boy spoke up again. "Inspector, my father," he said something else. "He saw a man, outside our flat, late last night. Watching him. He didn't come close, just watched." Finch's eyes narrowed. "Did your father recognize him?" The boy shook his head. "No. But he looked familiar. Like someone he shouldn't trust. Like someone we all should fear." Cindy's jaw tightened. "He's moving closer." The pub felt smaller suddenly. The walls seemed to press in. Every sound, the clink of glasses, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of conversation, was amplified. Finch could feel the weight of the unseen eyes, the meticulous planning of a man who knew exactly how to manipulate people without ever revealing himself. "Everyone stay inside," Finch said, his voice calm but authoritative. "Lock the doors. Keep your phones on. Anyone who leaves, let me know." Arthur Bell's hand shook as he held the paper, the latest in a series of cruel messages. I can't do this," he said. "I can't live in fear." Finch placed a hand on his shoulder. "None of us can. That's why we fight it, not run from it. And we start by understanding who we're dealing with." The boy looked up at Finch. "But how do we find him if we can't see him?" Finch's gaze met Cindy's. "We wait. We observe. And when the time comes, we force him to reveal himself." Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Somewhere, a shadow moved past the pub's front, unnoticed but aware. It paused for a long moment, just long enough to feel the pulse of fear inside the walls. Then it vanished into the wet night. And inside, the list rested in Finch's hand. The ink seemed darker, almost alive. A promise that the game was far from over. Episode 11, Everybody Knows Your Name. Part 5. The Bell and Anchor felt different that evening. Not in its structure or smells, stale beer, wetwood, the faint tang of smoke, but in its mood. The regulars moved like cautious animals, sensing the tension that had slithered into every corner. Chairs scraped lightly against the floor, whispered greetings sounded almost like warnings. Even the walls seemed to lean in, listening. Finch arrived early, ahead of the few who dared to venture inside. Malcolm was sweeping, the broom scraping in short, methodical strokes. His face was pale, eyes red-rimmed, hands moving with the practiced rhythm of someone trying to convince himself that everything was normal. "Quiet," Malcolm muttered. "Too quiet." Finch didn't answer, letting his gaze sweep the room. Shadows pooled near corners that held more than the normal secrets of a pub. The place had a memory, and tonight it felt alive with it. Cindy Lawless stepped through the door behind him, rain dripping from her jacket, collar pulled up. She kept her gaze sharp, assessing the room, every patron, every movement. "You didn't sleep," Finch said without turning. "Neither did you," she replied, voice low. "We're not alone." He raised an eyebrow. "No one inside." She shook her head. "Just someone, or something, that was here before us." Finch's jaw tightened. "Then we're on the right track." Arthur Bell, hunched and pale, approached cautiously. "Inspector, I've been thinking. About the list. About Peter. About that night, years ago." Finch turned toward him. "Go on." Arthur's voice quivered. "It's not just Peter Crowley. It's all of us who were there when Tom Reeves died. The man in the photograph, the one with Peter, is making sure we all remember. One way or another." Cindy's eyes narrowed. "How exactly?" Arthur swallowed. "By putting us on notice. One name at a time." "And I think he wants us to fear that he knows everything, that he can get to anyone." Finch's lips pressed together. The pattern was clear, the list wasn't just a threat, it was a game, a slow, meticulous harassment designed to terrify. Before another word could be spoken, the pub door opened. A gust of rain and wind whipped inside, carrying a new presence. Finch's hand hovered near his coat pocket. A young boy entered, dripping, eyes wide, hat clutched in trembling hands. "Detective Inspector," he asked. "I think someone's after my father." Finch gestured for him to sit. "Tell me everything." The boy explained quickly, almost in gasps, strange notes left under the door, footsteps outside their flat, a feeling of being watched. And the handwriting, just like the list. Cindy studied him. "Does your father know about Peter Crowley?" "No," the boy said. "But he saw someone outside, someone watching him last night. He didn't come close. Just watched." Finch's mind clicked into place. The shadowy figure wasn't content with the pub alone. He was extending his reach, orchestrating fear across multiple targets. Arthur's hand shook as he held the original list. "I can't live like this," he said. "I can't keep fearing my own shadow." "You don't have to," Finch said. "You fight it. You observe and you survive. That's the only way." Malcolm, pale and trembling, leaned toward Finch. "This man is escalating. First Peter, now others. And the notes, he's making them personal." Finch nodded. The past had resurfaced, and the shadow wasn't satisfied with subtle reminders. He wanted action, reaction, control. Then the boy spoke again, voice tight. "Inspector. I saw him outside our flat." He didn't speak. He just waited. Cindy's jaw tightened. "He's moving closer." The pub, for all its familiarity, suddenly felt smaller, less safe. Every sound, the clink of glasses, the hum of the heater, the whisper of voices, was amplified. Finch sensed it in his bones. The shadow was patient, clever, and ruthless. Finch pulled out the latest note, freshly slipped under the bar, and unfolded it. Ink darker, heavier than before. A single phrase at the top. "Someone has to fall first." Malcolm exhaled shakily. "That's clear enough." Finch's eyes swept the room. Every face held a story, a secret, a misdeed kept beneath the surface. The pub remembers everything. And the people in it, those who know, are all part of the game now. Arthur trembled. "But why? Why us? Why here?" "Because you were there," Finch said. "All of you. And because the man who holds this list wants to remind us that nothing is private, nothing forgotten." Cindy looked at Finch. "Then what?" "We wait," Finch said, voice firm. "We watch. And when the shadow shows himself, we force him into the open." Outside, the wind rattled the windows, carrying a sense of inevitability. The shadow lurked somewhere, unseen but omnipresent. Every heartbeat inside the pub was a reminder no one here was safe. Finch folded the note carefully, placing it in his coat. His mind traced every step, every possibility. The boy clung to Arthur's side, wide-eyed. Cindy's eyes never left Finch, sharp, calculating, ready. The threat had grown, the list had advanced, and the shadow's presence was undeniable. Finch knew, as he had so many times before, that understanding was the only weapon against a man who played in darkness. And tonight, the shadow had made it personal. Episode 11, Everybody Knows Your Name. Part 6. The night deepened around the Bell and Anchor, a slow, suffocating darkness that pressed against the pub walls as if it could listen. Finch lingered near the bar, the folded note in his coat pocket like a live wire against his chest. Every shadow seemed to twitch in anticipation. Cindy Lawless moved quietly among the tables, her eyes catching subtle shifts, a chair nudged slightly, a coat draped at a new angle, a reflection in the window that didn't match the movements inside. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough to signal vigilance. Malcolm hovered behind the bar, hands gripping the edge, knuckles white. The older man had grown accustomed to quiet nights, but tonight he felt the weight of history pressing down. Every name crossed out, every date circled, had its own gravity. The pub was alive with memory, and the memory had teeth. Arthur Bell trembled at the far corner, his fingers clutching a mug of tea that had long since cooled. He stared at Finch, eyes wide, haunted. I can't stay here much longer," he whispered. "I can't. What if the next name, what if it's mine?" Finch met his gaze steadily. "Arthur, you don't get to choose the order. But you do get to choose how you respond. The shadow is counting on panic. Don't give it to him." A sudden noise, too deliberate to be coincidence, sounded from the back of the pub. A chair scraped sharply against the floor, the sound slicing through the low hum of the room. Finch's hand went immediately to his coat pocket, feeling for the reassuring weight of his revolver. Cindy's voice cut softly but sharply. "He's inside." Finch's eyes flicked to the doorway leading to the storage room. The shadows there seemed unnaturally still. Something moved, then paused, as though weighing whether to reveal itself. Finch felt the old, familiar tension, the thrill of danger, the fear of the unknown. He stepped forward. "Arthur, stay back." Arthur froze, lips trembling. I can't." "Now," Finch said, and the command carried a weight that silenced the entire room. The figure stepped out of the shadows. For a heartbeat, Finch thought it might be one of the regulars playing a cruel joke. The outline was human, but the movements were calculated, deliberate. Every step was measured. Cindy flanked Finch instinctively, hands near her belt. Malcolm edged toward the bar, but Finch signaled him to stay put. The figure stopped in the center of the room. No words. Just presence. The shadow seemed to absorb the dim light, the reflection from the brass fixtures and polished wood failing to touch it fully. "You think you know the rules," Finch said, voice calm but carrying through the pub, "but you've misread them." No reply. Only the silence, taut and threatening. Then, from the pocket of the coat the shadow wore, a small slip of paper fell to the floor. Finch bent to pick it up. The handwriting was unmistakable, the same as the list, the notes, the previous warnings. One word scrawled across the page. "Watching." Arthur gasped, and the boy shrank back, clutching at his mother's coat. The sense of menace was no longer abstract, it was immediate, intimate, and suffocating. Cindy's hand brushed Finch's arm. "We're running out of time," she said. "If he leaves now, the next warning will land elsewhere. Someone else." Finch didn't answer. He was already calculating escape routes, possibilities, the figure's intent. He could see the pattern in the menace now, the invisible choreography of fear. Whoever orchestrated this had waited years for leverage. And now, the lever was in their hands. The shadow moved toward the door, pausing just long enough for Finch to note a glint on the floor, a small cufflink engraved with a crest Finch didn't recognize. He stooped, pocketing it for later analysis. A clue, perhaps. An identifier, maybe the first real step toward revelation. As the figure vanished into the wet night outside, the tension in the pub seemed to lift briefly, though everyone remained frozen, too aware that it would return. Finch straightened, voice low but firm, "Lock the doors. Check the windows. Make sure no one leaves without me knowing." Malcolm did as he was told, hurriedly securing the front while muttering to himself. Arthur sank back into his chair, hands trembling. "Why him?" he whispered. "Why now?" Finch shook his head slowly. "We don't know everything yet. But we will. And until then, you survive. That's all that matters." Outside, the rain had turned heavier, striking the pub windows with relentless precision. Finch stepped out to survey the street. The alleyways were dark, silent, and empty. Yet he felt it, the eyes in the shadows, distant, calculating, the unseen hand still moving. Whoever the shadow was, he wasn't finished. Back inside, Cindy moved along the perimeter of the room, scanning each face, noting reactions. "Fear makes people predictable," she said softly. "And predictable means vulnerable." Finch nodded. "And the shadow knows that." They worked in silence for the next half hour, checking the bar, the storage rooms, the back doors, the windows. Every corner of the Bell and Anchor was scrutinized, every potential point of entry examined. It was tedious work, but necessary. Finally, Finch returned to the bar. Arthur Bell was muttering quietly to himself, glancing at the door as if expecting the figure to materialize at any moment. Malcolm was behind the counter, pale but cooperative, eyes flicking nervously to the windows. Finch laid the note he had retrieved from the shadow on the counter. Cindy leaned over to read it again. "One word," she said. "That's all it took to terrify half the pub." "Words are enough," Finch replied. "It's what comes after them we have to anticipate." A silence settled over the room, thick and suffocating. Then the boy's father cleared his throat. "Inspector. I think I know something. About him. About why he's doing this." Finch turned to him sharply. "Go on." The man swallowed. "Years ago, at the pub, there was a fight, a man fell in the canal. No one called the police. Everyone thought he was drunk. I helped, or didn't stop it. Peter Crowley helped too. The list, it's a ledger of guilt, isn't it? Finch nodded slowly. Yes. But there's more to it. Someone is using that guilt to manipulate, to terrorize. And the person behind this knows exactly how to make each of us complicit, even when we think we're innocent. Cindy's eyes narrowed. And they're not done. Finch's gaze swept the room. Every face, every expression, every subtle twitch in the pub now carried weight. The shadow wasn't just external. The shadow had reached inside, into the lives and memories of the people who had tried to forget. Then, quietly, from the corner of his vision, Finch noticed movement beyond the windows. A figure, distant, watching. A deliberate pause. A signal. He couldn't see their face, but he knew, without a doubt, that it was the same shadow. Waiting, calculating, drawing them all into the game. The night pressed in. The rain turned to mist, curling along the street and across the canal. Finch stepped outside briefly, scanning the dark alleyways. Nothing moved. Yet the tension in the air, the deliberate silence, told him everything he needed to know. The shadow had made a choice. And that choice involved them all. Back inside, Finch turned to Cindy. We've seen enough tonight to understand his methodical. He doesn't kill without purpose. He watches. He chooses. And when he strikes, his voice trailed, heavy with implication. But he will strike, Cindy said. Yes, Finch agreed. And we'll be ready. Or we'll at least know enough to survive the first move. The boy's father whispered, I don't want to be part of this. You already are, Finch said gently. Whether you like it or not. Arthur Bell's hand shook as he touched the list again. Why us? Why me? Finch placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Because the past never forgets. And the shadow knows that. But it's not too late. Not yet. Not if we pay attention. Not if we act. Outside, the night stretched on, cold and unyielding. Somewhere in its depths, the shadow moved unseen, orchestrating, waiting, calculating. Inside the pub, Finch and Cindy prepared, quietly, meticulously, for the inevitable confrontation. The list had advanced. The threat had escalated. And the shadow, patient, intelligent, and terrifying, was still out there. But Finch had learned, through every murder, every fear, every secret, the game could be anticipated, even if it couldn't yet be stopped. And as the rain fell softly over the Bell and Anchor, every name on that list, every secret, every hidden guilt, carried a weight that no one inside could ignore. The first move had been made. The shadow had revealed part of his hand, and Finch knew the next step would test everyone in ways they had never imagined. And somewhere, beyond the night, the unseen villain smiled.